Lord, we thank you for the new year. We thank you for this man you've gathered. We thank you for those others who might get us, either they come in or they.
Mom is a very, very important influence in a man's life, as we're going to find out in this session. I want to make one qualification here as I start. So every guy look at me just for a moment. I'm not picking on your mother. Okay? What I'm going to be doing here this morning is we're going to be exploring the influence of a mom on a man's life and how sometimes unknowingly that influence, which she meant for good, can end up as a wound in a man's life. In their book, The Mom Factor, Doctors Henry Cloud and John Townsend write these words. They say, other than Dad, no one has influenced more the person you are today than your mother. The way she has handled your needs as a child has shaped your worldview, your relationships, your marriage, your career, your self-image, your life. What we learn in our relationship with our mother deeply affects every area of our adult life now. And we know that to be true. Mom goes deep in the male psyche. You know, a lot of times they have recorded airline pilots right as they're going down to crash, in those little black box. Recently, as they were replaying one of those little black boxes, as the pilot was trying to get control of the aircraft, right before it hit the ground, the last words were, "Mom." It's kind of like it went all the way down to the primal beginning of life. And there at the very core stands Mom. She's a powerful influence over a man's life. Unfortunately, sometimes that influence that mother has in your life leaves a wound. Kevin is but one illustration of this. And let me just read you an illustration of the life of Kevin. Kevin loved his wife. He adored her, but he was not strong enough in his own right to say no to her. The chief area that he experienced this was in his own need for time with a hobby or with friends. When he wanted space in which to pursue a hobby or to be with friends, she wanted him home. And he could not stand up for his own separateness. He would comply and then resent her, and then his love feelings would begin to disappear for her. This pattern continued until finally his resentment built up to the point that he actually left her. He complained that he felt smothered and controlled. What he could not see was that this was his own fault. Kevin had never established boundaries with his own mom. A strong-willed woman, she was content to be in control of him, and he had never left her. So instead of leaving Mom and cleaving to his wife, he turned his wife into Mom and left her instead. This is one of the most common divorce scenarios that occur in men's lives. Men see the controlling woman as the problem, and they fail to deal with their own flimsy boundaries. If they had established good boundaries with their mothers, they would not fear being controlled by their wives or their girlfriends. "Stop controlling me!" would turn into, "No, I don't want to." Men often see their wives and girlfriends as the controlling mothers that they're not strong enough to deal with, and so they leave. Now, I tell you the story of Kevin because I want you to see a point here, one that you're going to recognize real quickly, and that's just this. Much of what Kevin was dealing with in his marriage, remember this, was simply this: unfinished business. He's still walking around with Mom's apron strings. He didn't know it. He never analyzed it. He never did what we talked about several weeks ago, and that is looking back to find out why I am the way I am. He deals ignorantly in the now, fighting phantoms that he can't see, and thinking this person's the problem when the roots go way back to that suitcase that he carries and the apron that's within it. This is what we call the mom factor. And it's prevalent in a lot of men's lives, believe it or not. A healthy relationship with mom requires two significant breaks, guys. The first is from physical bondedness. Most of you know about that one. At physical birth requires this newborn who's been part of the mother's body for 9 months. Like you, when at one point you were literally one with your mother for those 9 months. Suddenly there comes a moment where you have to be separate from her. But to be separate from her requires an unnatural break, one that she can't necessarily do for herself. And at birth, there has to be this cutting of the umbilical cord. Now, I happen to be at the birth of all 4 of my children. And I can still see, as sometimes the kids like to replay their birth moment, where I'm in there with the camera moving around, and I helping coach my wife to breathe, and all the things that I learned in those classes. And I can still see in the birth of my last son, the camera's going, and Dr. Quay pulls my son out of the womb and holds it up, and he's from Taiwan. He says, "Dad, it's a boy. Come, cut cord." And you see the camera, and then you see these scissors come out in the camera, and there's the umbilical cord, and I start cutting that cord in two. And suddenly, a transformation takes place. And that is that my son goes from being one with his mom to separate from his mom. Now, for us, not having experienced that personally, that seems like a rather routine thing that occurs just in birth. But did you know that for many moms, that is deeply significant, that moment? Because in that cut, the uncomfortable, that comfortable relationship that mom had with her child, that she had grown accustomed to, that was easy for her now, that she had experienced over those months, suddenly that radically changes. And she can no longer relate to the child the way she once did. That relationship has literally been cut off. And a change has occurred. And for some women, that change is so difficult emotionally that she suffers from what is called postpartum blues. Have you heard that? If you've heard that, raise your hand just for a moment. Let me just say, everybody's heard of postpartum blues. Sometimes it becomes postpartum depression because it's so difficult to deal with. Literally, after the parting blues, because the relationship has changed. Now, most every woman eventually gets over that in this transition from oneness to separateness. But there's a second separation that a lot of moms don't make and never get over or have difficulty handling. It is a separation that's far more important than cutting this physical umbilical cord. It occurs when a son is seeking to go from being a mama's boy to being a man in his own right. And in that moment, another kind of cut is desperately needed. That cut is the cut from emotional bondedness. And it's extremely important. But for a mom to willingly give up or lose her emotional hold over your life and my life, that is a very traumatic thing that far exceeds the physical separateness. A lot of cultures recognize that. It's interesting that many primitive cultures recognize the need for that emotional cut. Not long ago, I was reading the story of a primitive tribe, and they have a very elaborate ceremony to bring that about. When the child is just about at puberty, the son is just about at puberty, the tribe arranges for this traumatic moment. The women in the tribe are given kind of a heads up on it, but late in the night, the men in the tribe dress up as warriors, and they come beating drums with lighted torches and yelling and screaming, and they rush into the mother's house or the mother's hut and grab the child, the son, And the mother, knowing all this is going to happen, still plays into it, and she's screaming, my boy, and he's screaming, mama, mama, mama. And the warriors pull the son from the mother's arms, and as he cries and reaches out for mom, they, with drums beating, carry the son out into a new life. And from that day forward, he lives with the men, never to live with mama again. And in that traumatic cut, he understands, as painful as it is, that he's no longer to relate to mama. He's to relate to the community of men. He's crossed over. Now, in that, it requires that mama wants to let him go, right? And I'm sure if we went into that tribe, there are a lot of mothers that would rather keep their sons right there in the hut with them for the rest of their life. Now, here's the question I want to ask you. Where in America, in the good old U.S. of A., do we have a clear place for such an emotional separation between mother and son? And the answer is, we don't, do we? There's no clear place along the road of life. And that is why, gentlemen, many men are still emotionally bonded with mom in one way or another. Now, we're going to explore some of the different ways. Some of them are very deeply entrenched. Some of them are just lightly connected. But because there's no clear separation, a lot of guys in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s still have this connection to both worlds. And that's why it's difficult for them to fully and separately identify into the world of men and to express manhood at a deeply emotional level, because there's still ties back to mom. Here's how Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend summarize all this. They say, to understand what is going on with men in their relational world, we must first look at some developmental patterns in their childhood. In the beginning, the young male is connected to mom. If things go well, with the attaching mom, he learns to feel comfortable with his dependency on her. Bonding, needing, and connecting are comfortable for him, and he enjoys being close. He's one with mom. But then he begins to separate from her in the second and third year of life and moves out of oneness into a separate identity. It's important that he not only become a separate person, but that he becomes secure in his gender identity. Later, as he moves away from mom and towards dad for identification with male identity, he accomplishes two things. One, he becomes a separate person, attaching to his father and gaining more autonomy from the oneness with mom. And secondly, in his attachment to his father and identification with him as a male, he gains gender identity. From this strong base, he becomes someone who is comfortable with connection and dependence on someone, but separate enough to be autonomous and an individual away from his object of dependency. He also becomes secure in his male identity. In short, he can love mom and be independent from her all at the same time. And then later he finds a woman to whom he can have a significant attachment, and he marries. And with all of this secure identity, he is strong and separate with his new love when it comes to boundaries and limits, and he stays free of her control, and yet he's comfortable with both his and her perfections, and now sees her as a person he can relate intimately with. And in this way, he's come full circle. He has successfully returned to the woman, but as an individual in his own right. So, real health for a man goes this way. Let me just give it to you in this little diagram. You can fill it in. From oneness with mom, literally, to a healthy physical separation, to a healthy emotional separation, to finally a healthy oneness with a woman relationally, called his wife. Did you know the book of Genesis pictures this really well? Just in one phrase in Genesis chapter 2, Here's the way it says it. For this cause, not speaking of marriage, of ultimately moving into an intimate relationship with a woman, for this cause a man shall leave, and by the way, the word in Hebrew there, leave, is to cut. It's speaking of this cutting, just like cutting an umbilical cord. Shall leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave in a healthy way to his wife, and they are able to become one flesh. And the reason they're able to become one flesh is because his ties are not back to his family, and in particular, as we're talking about this morning, he's still not connected with his mom. That's how he can relate successfully to his wife. Now that's the way it should be, but often it's not, because often mom, for one reason or another, in one way or another, refuses to let go. And that creates what I call the mother wound. Let me give you a definition for the mother wound. Here's what it is. It's an unhealthy emotional relationship with mother that causes a son to either be threatened by the influence of women later on in his life, or to over-identify and become submissive to that influence. Now, when I first taught this material years ago, I added this mother wound almost as an afterthought. I added it because I'd had some of that in my own life with my mom, filling in for my dad. But I had no idea how pervasive it was in men's lives across our community until I began to teach it and then get the response that I did. And as other pastors in other cities and other locations have taught this same experience, they've said, you know, this is really an issue with men. So if you're out there as a man here this morning and you're feeling, even now as I talk about some of these things, you're feeling, boy, there is something there for me. But there's probably something wrong with me. Most guys aren't attached to their moms, are they? Let me tell you, a lot of guys in some funny ways are. So don't feel alone. Remember what we learned about men's fraternity? This is a safe place and you're not alone. A lot of people in this room that can identify with what you're feeling maybe even now. It's an unhealthy emotional bondedness in some ways that later on in adult life cause you to have different responses to women and how you relate to a woman. And by the way, how you're relating right now to your girlfriend or your wife has attachments back at home. And if they're unhealthy attachments, it's called the mother wound. Now, here's some important characteristics about this wound. First, this wound is not blatant. This wound is subtle. When we've been talking about the father wound, we're talking about a nasty gash that guys feel. It's a ragged cut that bleeds and you can see it. And guys know they have it. But a mother wound is like a paper cut. You've had a paper cut where you've done it and stung and you look down and you can't see anything. It's almost invisible. But the point is, whether it's a nasty gash or it's a paper cut, eventually both of them bleed, don't they? They both bleed. That's the mother wound. Secondly, this wound is not one of abuse. The mother wound is not one of abuse. It's not mom being bad. It's not one of neglect or even absenteeism. It's a wound disguised as love and care. And that's part of the reason this wound is so hard to deal with, because it looks so nurturing and caring and loving. It's the Trojan horse. Some of you guys, if you remember your Greek mythology, you remember the Greeks trying to conquer the city of Troy. And they couldn't get in because the walls were so high. So what they did is they built this giant wooden horse and they gave it to the Trojans as a gift. At least the Trojans thought it was a gift. Inside were enemy soldiers. And they set the horse outside the gates, and they opened the gates and brought the horse in thinking, gosh, look at this wonderful gift. And then they went to sleep, and then the top of the horse opened and the enemy soldiers got out and the Greeks conquered the city. That's the way the mother wound works. You invite it in because it comes in as a gift. But inside, once it opens, are things of hurt. They weren't intended to. That's how it actually impacts a man's life. Thirdly, this is not a wound of inattention like it is with the absent father wound. This is a wound of overattention. It's over-involvement and over-identification with. It's over-concern, which keeps the relationship between a son and a mother over time fused and connected in inappropriate ways. Fourth, this is a wound that looks like love, but over time it feels like control. It looks like love, but it feels like control. This is also wound number 5 that's so powerful that in adulthood it can wrongly shape or warp the masculine psyche. Guys, I've talked to men over the last 15 years, and I know of men who are still tethered to mom's wishes, to mom's feelings about him and his marriage and his children and what he does. Still tethered in some emotional way to mom's control over him, even though they're 40 years old or 50 years old or even 60 years old. Now, sometimes we can just sit back and kind of laugh about it, like this cartoon here that I want to put up. Take a look at the cartoon for a moment. This guy's at a psychiatrist, and it says at the bottom, "Next session, Mrs. Bentlow, I'd like your son to solo." And there he is. He knows he's got problems. He's come to see the psychiatrist, but mom's going to be right there with him, still taking care of him. You know, when I was about 16, I began to feel that love that felt like control. As my dad had problems, as I talked to you about, and mom filled that vacuum, as mothers often responsibly have to do. After a while, though, as they had their war with each other over the different issues in their life, we were called in by mom. As she loved us and dad was absent, she expected in that love for us to be loyal. And my 2 brothers obediently followed whatever criticisms or thoughts she had about my dad. I was the only one that could look at it for whatever reason. Maybe it's just personality. And I thought, you know, there's certain things that we could do here that could help both of you, but you're going to have to both give a little. I kind of, as I said, got called in to be the negotiator. But let me tell you, when your mom is giving you a lot of love and expects loyalty, you don't negotiate. You just obey. And every time I didn't obey, I paid a huge price. I was alienated, criticized. I was called every name in the book. And all I wanted to see as a little 16-year-old was just my mom and dad love each other. But see, it wasn't about love. It felt like love. It presented as love. But it demanded control. And that's what happens in a lot of guys' lives because they love their moms. We all love our moms. But oftentimes that love can turn sour if we're not careful. Now, let's just ask the question, how does this wound occur? Well, I want to give you just kind of 2 general reasons I think will be obvious to everybody in light of what we've been talking about. First, it often begins with an absent or distant father. Doesn't mean that dad's not in the home. He may be in the home, but he's just not involved in the home. And so mom tends to move in and fill the void in some ways. And there are kids that are going to be going to school here in the next few moments all over the city of Little Rock who mom is filling the void. Dad's making the money, but mom's filling the void because dad's absent one way or another. And I told you that in the last 50 to 100 years, our modern society has given young men more and more over to the world of women. They grow up in homes where mom is the primary presence because dad's not there. They go to schools where the school teachers are primarily women. They go to churches where in their grade school classes, they primarily have female mentors. And so their whole world becomes a world of women, and they have to figure out masculinity in absentia, without men. And now, interestingly, there's a new phenomenon in the last 20 years where more and more sons are finishing college and stuff like that and coming back home to live with mom and dad. And dad's thinking they need to get out on their own. But mom's welcoming them back. Come on, live with us, son. I'll wash your clothes. I'll continue to feed you. I'll take care of you. I want to continue to be your mom. Because there's no cut. There's no break. And that's so unhealthy. Sociologist Marion Levy has written that the overabundance of female mentors, I'm quoting him now, with little interaction with male mentors, here's what he says, is a historical peculiarity unlike anything we've ever seen. And the product we are reaping is what he calls the feminized man. Now, I want you to look at that term just for a moment. The feminized man. What is that? Don't confuse it, guys, with the effeminate man. The man who has feminine physical characteristics or mannerisms. That's not what we're talking about. The feminized man can be the toughest, roughest guy you ever want to be around on the outside. But he can still be feminized. A feminized man is a man who has learned to act or think in ways that are more appropriate for women. He's passive oftentimes. He waits. He doesn't initiate. He doesn't lead. He follows. He doesn't take risk. He lets somebody else assert themselves in the moment. But he's strong and tough looking. But he defers. And he defers in this generation with a lot of young men to women. Let them be the warrior, the risk taker, the leader. The roles are reversed. And our culture is pumping out dogma that reverses the roles while it claims to be making them equal. And with young men being in the world of women and hearing all of that, suddenly their world is turned upside down. And if there's not a dad there to help correct that, which oftentimes there's not, since 40% of young people growing up in America today are without fathers, it creates tremendous emotional confusion and it keeps sons connected to mom. So it begins often with an absent dad. A second cause, though, more general, it's inflicted by 4 types of moms. One of 4 types of moms. And this can be dad in the home and involved in the home, but it can still be inflicted by one of 4 types of moms. The most common is what I'm just going to call the ignorant mom. The ignorant mom. Now, when I say ignorant, not ignorant in her intelligence. She can be brilliant. But ignorant in the sense that she doesn't understand the power she has over a son's life. And so today, with the idea of manhood being so vague and with a little by dad to help a boy know how he joins the community of men, she by default, continues to interact with her son in ways that she always has as a mom to a boy. And she's still talking to her son like a boy. She stays oblivious to the need her son has to disconnect from her emotionally. She's ignorant that he needs to develop a healthy separateness in his masculinity. He's 18 years old and she's still going and waking him up for school. Do you know sons like that in your home? She's still covering for him, still driving him to his doctor's appointment, or making an appointment for his haircut, or writing his checks. She's so over-involved with love that she is suffocating his masculinity. No wonder when the camera goes on the sports moment on television, all those young athletes wave to mom. Hi, Mom. You're number one. Absolutely. They may be 23 years old, but she's still taking care of them. That's what I mean. And they're not doing it because they want to hurt their sons. Just the opposite. They want to love their sons, but they're loving them too much. And they just don't understand it. And there's no community of men that come in and say, enough! We're going to cut that cord. Secondly, what I call needy, hurting moms. This is women who, for one reason or another, have lost their relationship with their own husbands, and so their son is grafted in as the next best male companion. In a sense, they marry their sons. Their son becomes an unsuspecting surrogate husband to fill in some way unmet needs in her. And as the son seeks to move into adulthood, losing him for the mom means that she's going to become lonely and alone. And so she tries to hold on. She tries to stay in touch. She gets over-involved. She becomes intrusive in the son's life as he moves into adulthood. And even after he gets married, she moves into the marriage with him in one way or another. And oftentimes that creates conflict in his marriage between him and his wife. The wife says, "Why can't you keep Mom out of our lives?" And the son just wilts because he doesn't know how. Then thirdly, there's unwilling to release moms. These are the strong and strong-willed dominant types of mom who want and need control. They're the ones who say to their son when he's 28 years old, "John, you and Mary are coming to our house for Christmas, aren't you?" And he's powerless to say no. We need to stay home for Christmas this year with our kids. She's the one who comes over to John's house and says, "John, you don't mind if I smoke," if she lights up. She's the one that says, "Carl, your children need this," or "your house needs that," and then goes out and buys it for him without his approval or his wife's approval. And the wife says, "Send it back. We don't need her being involved like that." But he finds himself suddenly in this rock and a hard place. And now he's between two women, and he doesn't know what to do, and he loses the respect of his wife as he stays bonded to his mom. And if the wife does stand up to his mother, then there's real problems. Because he's got divided loyalties. And boy, what a war that is. Then finally, there are the fill-in-the-gap moms. That's where dad is absent all the time, so mom, of course, fills the gap, but in doing so, she bonds too deeply to her son. The thing she really needs to do, and the thing that I encourage moms like that to do, is to find male mentors, whether it's Boy Scouts or a church group or an older man to get involved. But oftentimes she won't do that. What she'll do is she'll stay involved in his life and try to cover for the dad who left, divorced, died, or whatever. And by the way, next week when we talk about how to resolve this wound, we're going to see that Jesus had that problem with his mom. And I think you're going to get some surprising insights next week. Well, this is how the wound is inflicted. Let's just look now at how this wound manifests itself in adulthood. Basically, this wound creates in men one of two extreme responses. And I want to give you a quote from Prentice Tipton, an African American who wrote in a journal called The Crisis in Black Manhood. But it's a great insight into men, all men, although he's addressing the African American community. He says this: "When mothers lead the family because the fathers fail to lead, either by absenting themselves from the home or taking a passive role," he says, "boys are deprived of the most important natural model of manliness. Growing up mainly under the supervision of women, many experience insecurity over their identity as men." Now I'm going to put the quote on the screen. "One tendency," Tipton says, "for boys growing up in such circumstances is to rebel against women who are authorities over them and become socially disruptive, irresponsible in family and work commitments, overly assertive about their manly prowess, especially in sexual areas, or leading lives characterized by violence and crime, alcoholism, and other addictions." In other words, he says, growing up in a home of a mom that's over-involved without dad, one of the tendencies that will be created in the son's psyche is to rebel against that suffocating control and become overly dominant in his own right or disruptive. A second tendency, he says, is for young men to identify with the adult women who are authorities in their lives and then learn to behave or react in ways that are more appropriate to women than to men. They become what I call soft males. To the extent that young males take either option, they do not learn the discipline, the responsibility, and the character involved in being a man. So, on your outline, here are the two responses that this wound creates in later adult life, and you can see if either one of these apply to you. Here's the first one. Men become dominant and controlling towards women if they had an overly involved mom at home. There are some sons, part of it's their personality, I believe, but there's some sons in that environment, and I think I was one of them. I was one of 3 sons. I reacted differently than my 2 brothers. But there's some sons who don't like all that over-attention and that over-involvement. They feel suffocated by it, so they contend against mom during their years underneath her care. And rather than folding into mom's over-involvement, they fight like crazy against it. They compete and they contend with it, and they resent it. But the problem is that's how they learn to relate to women. So then they go out in adulthood and they relate to the other women in their lives that way. And they see all women as a possible threat to their independence and sense of masculinity. And they come to fear intimacy because if they get too close to a woman, that woman might control them. And so they always keep this kind of barrier up. Or what they do instead is they try to find a woman they can control. And they seek to marry women that they can be safe with, but primarily rule over. And they become tyrants in their home. And anytime that soft woman tries to express her rights and her needs, he sees that as you're trying to take control of me. So he becomes even harder and more dominant over her life. Do you see that? And the whole time he's trying to suppress her, he doesn't understand that a lot of that goes back to home. Because he doesn't know how to maintain a relationship with another fully formed individual who has rights and needs and expressions and equalities of her own. So he contends with women in his life. That's one of the ways it manifests itself. And it can do it in varying degrees. It doesn't have to be a harsh tyrant. But, you know, if your wife starts saying, now, why did you buy that car? You know, we were on a budget, and you went out and bought a new car today, and you find yourself getting furious because you think, all of a sudden, you're trying to take control of me. When really what you did is act irresponsibly. It may be because back there, you're still fighting the shadow. Some men become dominant and controlling towards women. I think the greater number of men have the second response in adulthood. They become passive and submissive towards women. And guys, I want you to know, in the guys under 30, I think this is epidemic today. Because of an earlier relationship with mom, because she overdid it for him, overcared, overnurtured, overdirected, and he let her. He became overly dependent and overly responsive to women. And now as an adult with women, his tendency with a woman, as he gets close to a woman, is to become passive and to lean on her too much. Let her lead too much. Seek to take care of me too much because that's the way mom did. In other words, he pulled out that giant umbilical cord he had to mom, and when he got into adulthood, he pulled it out and he began to look for what other woman can I plug this thing into and suck all these things that I need for me, care and concern, taking my feelings and lead me and provide for me from her. And so he tends to go out and marry a stronger woman. And when he marries that stronger woman, in their day-to-day relationship, you can see it. Because when they encounter issues, he waits for her rather than initiate. He shuns risk-taking. He struggles in making decisions. He places a high emphasis on his feelings. He prefers other people's approval, especially his wife's, before committing. And he looks like a man, but he acts in characteristics that are a little more feminine. He becomes the soft male. And what he wants in a woman is a mother wife. And he finds it. And she marries him. And at the beginning, she thinks she's marrying a sensitive male, the alpha male. But in time, she learns to resent him because he won't lead, and he won't protect, and he won't take risk, and he won't step forward, and she gets tired of it. He's passive. The healthy path with mom should have been physical and emotional oneness with mom in the early years, and then a healthy and complete separation in the middle years, and then finally a healthy relational oneness with a woman in the final years. Marriage. That's the way it should be. Unfortunately, for a number of men, it's not that way in varying degrees. So the question is, how do you heal this overly bonded with mother wound? And how do you cut this invisible umbilical cord? Those are good questions, aren't they? And those are the questions we're going to answer next week. We'll see you then.
So there we go. There we go then. How are you doing in the new year? Very well. Very well. Does this sound like things you have seen in your life before with man?
This is 99.9% of my nephew.
Your nephew?
Nephew
Yes,
concerning this.
yes, yes.
But
So how did he get there?
through that process, my was, very much involved because it's something.
Overly involved. Yeah.
Resent. He's problem he's having with he's been abusive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Emotionally, just manipulative.
Yeah.
Physically.
Yeah.
And I have discussed this with him over the years. He can only do
Mhm.
to what they needed.
Mhm.
Their problems. The thing
Wow.
applied to
Yeah.
he was never radical enough to have that father
Yeah.
figure guidance in it.
Yes. So you can see in your nephew that the so-called umbilical cord really was not cut.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Which one? Which one? You know, you can. Yeah.
Father was unfortunately had to fight. We went to the same
Yes.
and her sister spoke with the parents
Yeah.
or whatnot, they moved to Georgia. But,
Yeah.
he was always a little knuckly.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah.
And ended up doing some foolish stuff. In his knucklehead ways, got locked up.
Yeah.
And you can see the detriment that you took my wife, how that displayed things that kind of place in the father figure as much as I could,
Yeah.
in his life.
Yeah.
Father in his life, unfortunately.
So you can see here, Eric, the process began with something that the father did
Yeah.
or did not do.
Yeah.
Either he was absent, or he was very passive, or he was busy elsewhere in the name of making bread, but neglecting. And now the mother steps in, and she stays, and she oversteps her boundaries.
Right. She then tries to fill into the space between the mother and the father,
Mhm.
so to speak.
Mhm.
And I would tell my sister, yeah, you can't You can't teach him how to be a man.
No, you got to let him be a man.
I fed her of that in for his older years.
Yeah.
You know, when he was a young, in his 20s, 30s. We all him, like,
Let him be.
let him grow up and be a man.
Yeah.
He in trouble, let him deal with it.
Yeah.
He's there, out, and temper, and wouldn't feel any favor. Yeah.
There's some women who, when the boy come home from school, maybe with a bleeding nose, and there was a fight, and they go to school looking for that boy to beat her up, unknowingly to them, that is over involvement.
Yeah.
Maybe she should have just talked to the authorities, but she shouldn't take over that I'm gonna look for that boy to be, because now that creates a problem with the child. So, Michael, have you seen this thing in any of
I've
the
seen it
or
a
boy?
lot.
Wow.
Cousin,
Mhm,
but she's a girl.
mhm,
Same kind of issue, but like in reverse.
Mhm.
You know, and she's still, to this day, she got 5 kids, and it's more or less because my grandma stepped in as a mother,
Mhm.
mother figure, and
Mhm.
you know, she's been alone,
Yeah.
and like she lives in a house, but she also has to pay rent. My grandma goes there every day, or everybody goes, takes the kids to school, she lays in bed. And she has no, and doesn't know what being an adult is.
Yeah.
She's 30-some years old.
Yeah.
And does nothing.
So you can see the detrimental effect,
Oh, yeah.
damage. Somebody over 25 cannot make a bed, cannot laundry, cannot do things that he ought to do because it was done for him. Yeah. And kinda, I came to believe that this will have to be. And when they get married, they transfer those into their
Absolutely.
adulthood.
And who's done that is, seen them do it throughout the years. When we had moved to elementary school days, we don't think it much more. Started thinking that was giving him advice on the side. People, I know they mean it. I said, you ain't the one you need. to
He's
take
not the
advice.
one. He's not the
I
model.
said, don't take advice from him.
Yes.
He's the fun uncle, everything's shiny and flashy, fun. I said, but let me give you a little bit of the back.
Yes.
Did I?
No.
Being the easy going guy, so he had him in his ear.
Yep.
And stuff like it, but he had stuff.
Okay. Okay.
I said, that's what you need to be taking advice from.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So these things are practical.
Oh, yeah.
I can tell you, as a counselor, I've seen it. I remember one young man, 32 years old, in a counseling session. He would always come with mom. I came to find that he couldn't even drive. Mother had to drive. Why can't you drive? Because mother has always driven. Did you even get a license? I've been trying to. I've not been able to. So she let mom take over his life. So what do you call that? Other than you became handicapped. Who brought the handicap? The overly bonded mother involvement. She went over and above. She outdid me. A process that should have actually evolved naturally as I learned things and I became, it did not. Where was Daddy? Daddy had nothing to do with me. Maybe Daddy was in jail or was absent, divorced, whatever. So mom filled that gap. And unfortunately, she went too far. She went too far. So hearing this, and you man, you can see you have a role. Your job is cut out. Then I have two sons. And I sit with them. And I tell them, hey man, it's got to be your own man. Listen to me, ask me questions, follow me, and let us correct some issues that there. If I see it, I'll point it out. If you feel there is a question, please ask. Be, yeah, be involved with your child.
Come up with a little bit of this situation right now with mom getting divorced. So, a couple of cracks. And then we come over and take her apart. Which is, that's fine, you know, it's, I understand, it's still big, you know, they have a big house and garden and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then when you said about the Christmas thing, you know, the best thing, like, you're coming to my house for Christmas. Right? Then before I left, she goes, we're doing Christmas at your house next year.
Yeah.
Because you have the house, I have the apartment.
Yeah.
You know, it was just, that was funny when they said that.
Yeah.
What he's going through.
So remember, he talked about the soft nail. That is, you stop making decisions for your own household and you let her be. When you do that, man, you know what happens. Because you have a woman in your house with your wife. If your mother is trying to make decisions in your house and you're just watching it and you cannot resist, what happens to you and your wife? For one, you respect. She'll lose respect on you. Why are you letting it happen? If she buys things that you don't need, carefully reject those and let her know we don't need that. Don't overstep your bounds. So, in other words, be the man to put her where she belongs. It's not arrogant. It's that this is my house. What happened to in my father's house has nothing to do with my house. And I'm not rude, I'm not careless. It's only that.
My wife's kind of with her mom. All I have to do, or all she has to do, or one of the kids have to do is say, I really like your shirt. And bam, hang on my front porch the next day. Or I'm gonna go by the store and get toilet paper, and there's 5 cases in front of my door the next morning.
Yeah.
If you order something online, it just shows up at the house. And then my wife's like, where did these shoes come from?
Yes.
I don't know. And she looks and goes, my mom said, they're ugly. She'll actually call her mom back and say, I don't want these.
We don't need them.
Right, we don't need them. Take them back, send them back. Why? There's other stuff we can spending money on, not this, you know, because so. But I think my mom was, when she said, we're having Christmas at your house this year, I said, I don't know if I'm doing it. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, me and Gina's gonna talk and see what we wanna do. I said, we've been coming to your house for years. That's just always been a thing, going to her house for years.
Yeah.
I said, but I don't know if I wanna do that much.
Yeah.
And she said, okay.
So looking at the question there on page 26, it's like we're answering question 1. What most impacted you in this session? What I have you say is that what the mother does, who becomes over involved, limits the man that was supposed to be limits him, interferes with him, and sometimes handicaps him completely, you know? So the possibilities that this man would have become himself doesn't happen. he becomes a kind of a captive. You know, it's a kind of a, it's a kind of a deficiency that forms, you know, it will hinder the potential of that man becoming himself. And you will see tendencies that look different. They are
And in most
feminine.
instances, it's because the male wasn't there.
Yes, yes, yes. So we really need to individuate, you know, become ourselves. There needs to be that freedom. And if that freedom is not there, then it becomes soft male. Or, so which is the second, which is the passive and submissive to women, and we let go and we let them rule our lives. Now, or the opposite of that is becoming too strong in a very unreasonable way, becoming dominant and controlling because we are trying to run. You look at it and you can see that was not necessary. Well, you did it because you're trying to run away from something that happened to you. And you find men like that. Very, very strong and domineering in a very unreasonable way. Or very soft male, very passive. Question two, describe your relationship with your mom growing up. How is or how was it? And how is it now in you as an adult? That's a very personal question. That's a very personal question. In me, I remember mom being supportive, nurturing, would advocate for us, but he would have always let us. We were 6 boys and 2 sisters. If you came home crying because there was a fight, mom would ask you, what happened? And then what did you do? What happened? And then what did you do? Meaning, she's leaving it to you that there's something you could have done. Either leave it alone and get away from that conflict, or stand up as a man. Remember, we have said there are some women who will now begin to empathize in an unreasonable way to the point of showing you that I'm gonna go after that man. Not that they should be allowed to be bullies. That is still a process of you becoming. You know, because bullies have a way of asserting themselves. Maybe bullies are also becoming bullies because of things that have happened in their life. But there is a way to overcome being bullied by really learning how to stand for yourself. It doesn't necessarily the physical mind, but it's a kind of an intellect, it's a kind of a skill that happens that actually makes people silly.
I never said it was fault.
Go ahead, Mike.
9% was fault. Like somebody confronts you, like the house or school, outside of school. Everybody wants to run their mouth. And I had a gym teacher, like I had a boy come up to me in school, at gym. And meet me after class, bring your guys and I'll bring my guys, you bring your guys. I'll bring your guys. So arguing with me. And the gym teacher said, right over there, you can still handle your business, guys. And the boy backed up
Yeah.
and walked away
Yeah.
because he needed somebody else to fight.
So he wanted to bring a gun. Like,
No, he just wanted to bring his friends. He wanted me to get my friends and his friends and then everybody fight.
yeah,
And I was like, I don't need my friends. I fight my own fight.
yeah.
And the teacher saw what was happening and said, run right over there, go handle you guys' business. And we won't play.
Different ways of handling bullies. Question 3 is another personal question. Would you say you have effectively made a break in the mom? Does your mom presently exert an unhealthy influence in your life or in your marriage? What would your wife say? That's another personal question. It is actually a way to hook it into you. Just evolve how things are. You know, I necessarily don't need to be a David, but it's you to a very good question for Eric here. Just look at it. Look at it whether you're making a healthy break. Healthy break. If it's unhealthy, hey, look at whether it's because maybe daddy is absent, or daddy is not involved, or you're not having good interactions with your daddy. Yeah, evaluate that and make for yourself what you think. And maybe to make it a little more relevant so that we are not passing on talk is, do you know people who have not made a healthy break? And that's exactly where you were giving that answer. If you did, healthy break is very important. It is a process. It's that developmental milestone. You see somebody coming from being a child to being a preteen to being a young adult. There is a progression, and healthy breaks are necessary. We cannot allow to accept their faults. We can.
I had a real blessing. And my mother was the she passed the table. A young boy going into a man. She hanging around somebody and she would tell me. Yep. A little bit of force. Okay, you had an opportunity, the advantage to listen, and then you had to find out for yourself. So to speak. The same thing with dating women. And my mother. My wife's mother, very good. She did not overstep her boundaries. She was not a woman to bite her tongue. Yeah. My wife now. My the wife, my kid's mother and my mother get along fantastic. The girl between now and my wife now wasn't so, but my wife now is actually my high school sweetheart. And my mom always adored her. Even way back, my mom still cut her hair when we broke up. Oh, we got back together, and they're fantastic together. And my kid's mom, which this is very rare nowadays, but my kid's mom and my wife get along fantastic. Like my kid's mom came to my mom's Christmas party. You know, I've gone to Brewers, my kid's mom and my wife and her boyfriend. We all get along just so well. That's the blood. It's unbelievable. And I tell people that they're like, what? Real moms know. You know, I said, and everybody gets along. My mom and my stepfather's ex-wife were close friends. I mean, everybody got along and just see that.
I'm looking at a picture that was taken that is historic. I have 7 siblings, so we are 8. We are 6 brothers and a mother. Our father has been dead for 6 years now. So I don't know whether it happens in America. How do you handle succession? If, for example, your daddy died and he had property, how is succession handled? I don't know how you do it.
Well, my father passed 60, and very much type of But. And, you know, when I passed, just let her, it's like, let her stay here. I can go to, you know, all my kids. Okay, fine. You know, I ain't think nothing of it. I was like, all right, ain't nobody worried about, you know, your wife or whatnot, and her being here at the house. She stay here. And it's her whole house, go to her. I didn't think about it. Yeah. So, we court. Yeah, first. Well, you'll be getting this about the, you know, the state house or whatnot. I got to go inside. We got, it was like the third time. I found it there. Let's get a copy of the will. I said, I don't know what Dad told me, but hold up. If we call up for something like that. I found out it was nothing.
Okay.
I'm not going to drink. When they got divorced, he never granted him the wish of being divorced from.
Yeah.
So he never signed a paper. That's what some of this warring was in between,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that situation. I said, now all our lives, going to act like I'm in everything. And my father didn't even leave. He still got everything in his name. And when we got the will, I was like, this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, she's your stepmom and your dad were. They were never married. Changed the name. Oh, gosh, she legally changed. Because we looked over and me and my sister were like, oh. So it legally, you know, like his wife, they was legally married. I said, there's no way he could have left everything to his children.
So in a way, the father left things hanging. And now it becomes confusion. Succession has to be organized very well.
Yeah.
So this picture here is 8 of us and our mother, because our father is dead. Been dead 6 years, and I've been stuck here in the United States. So my brothers have not dealt with the succession. We know it, but you know, my father, being an old man, he didn't write elaborate wills, but we know exactly what he meant. We there were documents we read when he just immediately he died, but we never acted on it. This time around, those kind of letters that you talk about, they're beginning to be an issue. So we got to, so we this picture here, 8 of us, and I mean the picture, we have gathered right after coming from the chief. Then begin. Yes. That goes to eventually it will go up to the judge. Now, mother had to say what she wants, because of course she's an old lady. So she has to say the property of my husband goes to his children. Now there's land that goes to the sons, but there is other property that also is in the lady's care. So we have land, we have plots, we have shares, whatever it is. So this is that process. And it made me think a little bit about succession and about all that. If it's not handled, it becomes a problem to the children. That's how we got to stand up on our feet when it comes to being there. We cannot leave our children to tension or to confusion. That's a historic picture because
I got one question, this got,
Yeah.
so the money that you got, was that, you trying to sign the house over to her, or was that?
No,
You didn't give
we
that.
went and got a copy of it. He drove down there to Baltimore, registered the will, you know. It's elaborate. They do this and that and this. My sister got. It's public record. They're his kids. So. So the guy that was trying to hold it, as soon as my sister said that, a couple minutes later. Everything was in public record. They just said, "Well, we was like, we're his kids. We have a right to know, but now do we found out what she was. So we read it through. I said, oh, Dad, but I couldn't hold up in court because she had kids, but what the situation was, we was getting these letters. And basically, these letters were an attempt to collect some debt on the property or whatever, you know, hospital bills or something like that, that she had in order to stay,
That's what I was wondering with the.
yeah, in order to stay in the house. And so, you know, none of us, you know, brothers and sisters on our side didn't really think about it. You know, we got our lives and stuff like that. But we were like, why, wait a minute, this ain't his thing. Why we keep getting these?
did she have children?
Yeah,
Your
because
father?
she had, no,
None with your father.
no.
So there is no property going then on her side. It comes to you.
The only thing that goes to her kids are furniture and her stuff that she wanted to marry.
The
But
things
the
like,
house,
things like house and
yeah,
land.
we found out his father had a boat, and, you know, he left it to me. I, you know, fixing off the boat and it's too big. But so years ago, you know, he called me about something going on in the house because he was bells on. It was locked. Secure everything. Why don't you sell the boat? I said, because I told Dad sell the boat. I don't want the boat. And he left it to me. So I told her to sell the boat. And then when we got a copy of the will, technically she wasn't supposed to sell that property. But, you know, I agreed, sold it and whatnot. I said, you keep the money. I don't need it. I said, I told Dad to sell the boat. He was living, but he didn't want to sell it. He just to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is a question beside the overly bonded with motherhood, but you can see that stepmom could have some things that would confuse you guys.
Oh, it was a whole lot of confusion.
Yeah, yeah. Question number 4, go pondering over it. It says, can you see a connection between the way you relate with your mom and how you relate with other women in your life or with your wife, with your other wife? You know, can you see a connection? Well, my mother was respectful, did not really attach herself to anything to me or to us. And so the respect I saw between her and my father has continued to permeate in us. That if there was over involvement, I could see that coming through with us kids. So think about that question because the way it was is likely to be something carried on. If father was away and mother was too involved, it's likely that some of those things continue. But anyway, all these things that happen here, we will handle them in lesson number 7, lesson number 8, making a healthy break with mom. It is important for us to learn how to make this healthy bond, how to make this break. So,
So how's your relationship with your mom? Huh?
I have a good relationship with my mom. I think how you describe it now. Per se. Mornings and eves because of somebody's but then try to overstep the try to control too much. Per se. I think that's necessary. I don't think we should do that, but she would let us figure it out for ourselves.
okay, okay, okay. So you don't see her being over it before. Okay. So there's some kind of healthy. Okay, okay. It's very important. Very important. Think about it. This question applies to you in your future as you go. Is there a healthy break with your mother that doesn't allows you to become your own man yourself? That is what question number 4 says. If not, why? If not, why? Remember this guy I was talking about, 32 years old, cannot even pass a driver's test because mom always drives. So come to find out, even for him to have a bank account, mom has to go to sign for him, and the mom has to have a say. Any job he holds, mom has to approve that you can have that job or you can't. I want the whole lot to try to disentangle that young man from mom. Some of these lessons sound very practical in a counseling room, but you find mom will not live without a fight. She won't have this man. It's like he became a surrogate husband.
My nephew. It's, you can look at Joseph. He would come around. Who's over this, and some of this, and some of that. And all that stuff, he's wearing religion jeans, Prada shoes. Why are you buying this stuff for? I'm a dead man. I said, he ain't buying this stuff. The BMW he's driving, his new wife brought that. In case you didn't know.
Anyway, our session is over. We come back here on the 21.